I said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Chase Ledoux. I'm the Special Projects Manager for the International Elephant Foundation. And on behalf of IEF, we're excited to welcome you to this workshop. Joining us today is our Executive Director, Debbie Olson, and our Director of Conservation, Sarah Conley. As you may be familiar, we initiated a virtual series of workshops this year to help make grow a stronger pool of applicants, both for elephant conservation through IEF and through other organizations as well. And so we're excited to share with you a new lesson today. Before we get started, just some housekeeping items. Because we have people from all over the world joining, if you don't mind muting and turning off your cameras during the presentation, that will help save on bandwidth. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions, and we may ask you to unmute or show yourself on camera then. During the presentation, you're welcome to put any questions or comments you have in the chat, and we'll address those at the end as well. This presentation is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be sent to all registrants at the end of the day once the recording is available to us. And it will also be posted on IEF's website for future viewing in case you want to go back and readdress any questions you have. Okay, I think we're ready to get started now. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hello everyone again, and thank you for joining us at today's session on how to write effective reports. My name is Chase Ledoux. Again, I'm IEF's Special Projects Manager, and I'll be walking you through what makes a strong, clear, and impactful report for the International Elephant Foundation. However, hopefully these lessons will also be useful to you as you generate reports for other applications or other purposes as well. This session isn't just about filling in a template. It's about helping you tell your story in a way that highlights the difference your work is making for elephants, communities, and other wildlife. The goal is to make reporting easier for you, more meaningful for organizations like IEF, and ultimately more persuasive for donors who make your work possible. So let's start with why these reports matter. Your reports are one of IEF's most powerful tools for communicating results to donors and partners. They help us show where our collective funding goes and what's changing on the ground. Strong reports ultimately also influence renewal decisions, not only for your own project, but for future funding streams across IEF or whatever organization you're writing your report for. Think of it as a chain or as a linear process. Your project is reported in your report, which gets shared with IEF or whatever organization you're talking about. And that organization shares it with donors, and that influences the availability of future grants. So that means when your report is strong, because we know your project and your work is strong, your story and therefore your project's impact travels much further. Reports also keep you top of mind with the funder and increasing the likelihood that they will think of you when funding opportunities arise outside of their normal cycle, which for us at IEF happens more often than you might think. It's also important to recognize this is your time to communicate what's going on the ground with your funder and maybe give details that you wouldn't be able to share in a quick email, text message, or a phone call. So these reports are really vital. Now, it's also important to remember as we talk about the aspects of the reporting today, who's actually reading your report. And all of you are experts and leaders in your field, but most IEF donors and our partners aren't elephant biologists or field ecologists. Maybe they haven't even ever seen an elephant in the wild before. They may be business professionals, philanthropists, or volunteers who love elephants, but they don't know your technical world. So it's important to write for clarity. Ask yourself, could someone who is unfamiliar in my field or with my work understand why this matters? So I think the big lesson here today is your report is for a much wider audience than you might imagine. Writing reports may seem like a chore or just a checkbox you have to tick off as a requirement of your grant, but it's but it's not just for IEF or whatever organization you're writing for. It's for anyone who cares about elephants and wants to see the difference being made. So there's real power in your reporting too. So throughout today's workshop, I'll be referencing specifics about IEF's reporting requirements. Now, these report guidelines are provided in your grant agreement. Once you earn a grant, they're in Appendix 2. There are 3 or 4 different pages that walk you through exactly what we expect. And but a lot of these reporting requirements are similar or the exact same for other grants outside of IEF as well. Specific for IEF, and I'd like to mention this too, is that the first thing listed in these reporting guidelines is monthly check-ins or updates. We stress this as part of the reporting process because it helps keep us engaged, it helps keep our donors engaged. In case bad news or unexpected challenges arise, they're not surprises for anyone in the relationship. And again, the more often you update us, the more likely you're top of our mind in case surprise funding appears and we think your project or your work may be a good fit for that funding. So, what makes a strong report? First is a clear summary of the conservation needs and outcomes. You can think of this as your abstract, and I think we even describe it as an abstract in our own reporting guidelines. You should list the specific goals that were first introduced in your grant application, and you should specifically say the actions you made towards those goals in some sort of measurable way. We're also looking for an honest discussion of challenges and what is learned. We've been funding elephant conservation work for decades, and we know it never goes to plan as you've outlined it in the grant agreement. So it's not a bad thing to share your challenges. We just want to know what they are and how you're dealing with them, potentially even how IEF could help you overcome those challenges. Remember, no project is perfect. Um, our donors especially like to hear about the clear conservation outcomes for elephants, other wildlife, and the human communities that live around elephants. And what can be especially compelling, and we'll talk about this more near the end of the presentation, is a short human interest story that helps the readers connect emotionally to your work. Certainly, the measurable outcomes that you can quantify are really important, but it's those human interest stories that really tap into the emotions and the hearts of the people reading the report. So, if you think of IEF's mission, which is a sustainable future for elephants, every one of the pieces that I've listed on the slide here should connect back to that mission. So, think about IEF's mission, which is probably similar or the same as your own organization's mission, and make sure what you're reporting ties back and speaks to that mission. Every section of the report should link back to your original objectives and to IEF's mission of ensuring a sustainable future for elephants. Okay, the next series of slides is essentially going to go through some common issues we see when we're reading reports from projects, including some examples of why those things may be bad. But for every bad example, we're going to provide you of a good example of a way to fix that. So hopefully this will help directly inform how you can write reports moving forward. So some of the common pitfalls we see, the first one is being too generic. Again, we understand you all are very busy doing the work on the ground. And so oftentimes reporting may not be top of mind. And so it may be easy to be pretty vague about exactly what you're doing. But remember, numbers and specificity help bring your story to life. So often we will see this statement in reports. We worked with communities to reduce human-elephant conflict. And that is a very vague statement. As you can imagine, it can mean dozens of different things. A way you can fix that by bringing specificity is by saying our workshops reached 2,807 people in 12 villages, and that speaks to exactly how you worked with communities to reduce conflict. So the difference here is that it transforms your effort of addressing human-elephant conflict into actual impact that's quantifiable. uh, Oftentimes, we often see uh, an unclear link between the actions and outcomes. So you may put a number down. You may say, we planted 1,200 trees, but especially to someone who may not be familiar with your project site or with how elephant conservation works, like some of our donors, it's difficult to understand how that links. And remember, a lot of these donors also didn't read your original grant application, or if they did, they don't remember it from a year ago. So it's important to be very specific and explicit about how what you do, your actions, links to the conservation outcomes that really are the backbone of your work. So instead of saying we planted 1,200 trees, you can say we planted 1,200 thorny acacias, creating 5 kilometers of natural barrier to elephant incursion. And there it's very easy to connect for the reader about how that action enhanced conservation outcomes. At the other end of the spectrum of being too specific is being overly technical. And as I said earlier, a lot of you are experts in your field. And as a scientist myself, I get really excited about the details sometimes. But it's also important to remember who's actually reading your reports. And while a lot of us at IEF have the technical expertise, many of our donors do not. So saying something like land use zonation mapping was validated via GIS polygon layering, spatial ecologists may understand that perfectly well, but a donor who's a philanthropist or a business person without any field experience probably doesn't. So see if you can transform that technical language into something that's maybe a little bit easier for a lay audience to understand. Instead, saying something like, we mapped farmland to plan safe zones between farms and elephant paths. The technical details, of course, are really important if you go and publish your work in an academic journal. But for us at IEF, remember, we're communicating to a much broader audience that may not grasp those concepts. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we can often see right through reports that avoid speaking about any of the challenges because, as we all know, challenges arise every day. Oftentimes, we can handle them without issue, but it's important for IEF to understand where those challenges lay. So just saying overall project implementation went well sort of gives the sense that there's something below the surface. You can specifically tell about those things and how you may have overcome them. Rain delayed planting by 2 months, which is the challenge, but seedlings survived at a rate of 80%, describes how you overcame that challenge. Avoid glossing over these challenges. Donors really value honesty because it builds credibility to your work. This example of the statement, the good example, rain delayed planting by 2 months. This one's honest, it's informative, but it's still positive at the end. So there's ways to spin things while still being honest. Okay, so tapping into how you may think about conceptualizing your reporting, transforming your reporting from weak to strong reporting. You want to make sure all of your reporting is concise. Is it good to provide details, like I said, but we don't just want details for detail's sake. Quantitative, linked to your goals, and shows impact. And I believe IEF's reporting guidelines do a good job at exactly providing you with guidance about how all of the components of your report connect to this and sort of contribute to this strong reporting. Always show what changed because of your action. Don't just report what's going on in the field, say what you're doing and how that leads to conservation outcomes. Donors are really seeking evidence of effect, not only activity. So some poor examples of reporting may be something like we trained rangers or workshops were held for community members. Obviously, if your grant is supported to do these activities, it's important to know these go on, but we want to know what changed as a result of those. And so even in IEF's grant application requirements, we we require that your goals be measurable and attainable using whatever methodology you've set out. So you can extend that a little bit further, even if it's just an interim report. Instead of saying we trained rangers, you can say we trained 12 rangers from 4 conservancies in crime scene management, leading to 8 successful prosecutions. So that statement alone, you can go back to the top bullet. This is pretty concise. It's quantitative, it's got numbers in it. It's linked to the goals of the project, and it also shows impact, those 8 successful prosecutions. Another example, instead of saying workshops were held for community members, you can say 3 workshops trained 90 farmers, Follow-up surveys showed 80% of these farmers applied new deterrents. Here's a bit of a longer example. This is a theoretical abstract from a report IEF may have received in the past about a project in Sri Lanka. Think about as I'm reading through it, whether it's a good example or a bad example of reporting. So I'll read it fairly quickly. The project aimed to reduce human-elephant conflict in northern Sri Lanka. Several activities were carried out in different villages, such as community meetings, training sessions, and installing some fences. The communities were very supportive and the overall results were positive, though we faced challenges with weather and local cooperation. The team continued to raise awareness and educate people about elephants. Some farmers planted crops that elephants don't like, and this situation seems to be improving. The fences are working well in some areas, though there were still problems with elephants in others. Overall, the project made good progress and will continue next year depending on funding availability. More monitoring and engagement will be done, and we hope to achieve the objectives in the future. So there are certainly some good aspects of this abstract. They acknowledge some challenges that are going on. They point to what will be happening after the project. But there are distinct areas for improvement here, and I've highlighted these in red on this slide. So a lot of these lack specifics. So something like the overall results were positive. Don't tell me what's going on. They repeat vague positives, things like progress and supportive. And while we don't have a list of words you cannot use in your reporting, just saying these results over and over again contribute to that lack of specificity. They don't tie actions to measurable outcomes, and they also don't tell a story or show the conservation impact of those actions. So on the next slide, I'll provide an edited version of this same abstract from the same project that corrects a lot of these issues. So here's a better example. The project in northern Sri Lanka worked to reduce crop losses and promote coexistence between rural farmers and Asian elephants. Over 12 months, the team collaborated with 6 farming villages surrounding the Habarana forest corridor, reaching 312 households through community training and field demonstrations. By introducing non-palatable crops such as citrus and chili, farmers reported an average 47% reduction in crop rates compared to 2023. In partnership with local wildlife officers, 2 new 2.5-kilometer fences were constructed and maintained by trained community members. The project also documented elephant movement patterns using 12 camera traps, identifying a 15% decrease in elephants entering farmlands. These results demonstrate that locally led mitigation and land use planning can reduce conflict while supporting sustainable agriculture. Ongoing activities include monitoring fence effectiveness and scaling the model to adjacent villages with local government support. So there's a lot of good going on here, and IEF would be pretty happy to receive an abstract like this in a report. These things are pretty concise, very factual, and self-contained. There's data throughout this whole abstract, including exact timeframes of when things happened and the measurable change that happened as a result of this project's actions. And all of these things, again, tie directly back to IEF's mission of creating a sustainable future for elephants and communities. And they align that mission with the project objectives that they set out initially in their grant application. So this is a great example of an abstract. We'd be pretty happy to receive this. So many IEF reports list what teams did or their activities, but not what changed as a result, as I said earlier. So let's dive into how we may be able to describe the difference your project made, not just what it did, because remember, activities show impact. So here's a bad example. We conducted 72 anti-poaching patrols during the reporting period. Rangers covered large areas and removed several snares. Patrols were challenging due to fuel shortages, but continued throughout the year. Again, there are some good aspects of this. We have a number in there, so we know exactly how many patrols happened. This statement also acknowledges challenges, but this doesn't describe the outcomes of any of those actions. Another thing about listing challenges is your challenges don't look as bad if you can describe some measurable outcome of your actions. It can sort of put those challenges in a context that's more positive. So instead of saying this, you may instead want to say, During 72 anti-poaching patrols, rangers removed 84 snares and arrested 7 suspects, leading to a 30% reduction in elephant carcass reports compared to the same period in 2023. Patrol data also helped identify 2 new poaching hotspots, which are now part of routine surveillance. So this statement directly connects the activity, those patrols, to a measurable result, which are the 7 suspects arrested, the 84 snares removed, and that result led to a conservation outcome, in this case, a 30% reduction in elephant carcasses. It uses these comparisons over time, so it compares this result to the results from a year previous in 2023. And because you're comparing this result to a previous result, it highlights that your project is learning and adapting to real-world situations on the ground. Here's another poor example. We organized workshops to educate farmers about elephant behavior and conflict prevention. Attendance was good and participants were interested in learning. Doesn't really tell us much. It's really surface level. Instead, you could say something like, through 5 coexistence workshops reaching 212 farmers in 4 villages, those are very specific numbers, 78% of participants later reported using at least one new deterrent, chili fences, flashing lights, or community watch patrols. So that states the outcome. And then crop damage incidents in these villages fell by 41% over 6 months. So that describes the conservation impact and compares it to the situation that was going on before your work started. And just one more example, we held meetings with wildlife authorities to discuss policy on human-elephant conflict. A lot of our projects connect with local stakeholders like local governments or authorities, which is obviously really important. But especially for our donors, they don't really understand how those meetings result in something tangible, some tangible conservation impact. So instead, be specific. Following stakeholder meetings with wildlife authorities, the draft National Human-Elephant Conflict Mitigation Plan was endorsed at the provincial level. As a result, 2 districts have begun implementing standardized incident reporting and coordinated response teams. Again, this just demonstrates the influence beyond your project's sort of real or imagined boundaries, and it also shows how tangible policy adoption resulted in some change. A lot of times these changes take a long time to materialize, especially at the policy level. So of course, at your 6-month report, we're not expecting that in the middle of your project, everything is now hunky-dory and rosy, and no more challenges, and that the policymakers have completely adopted your vision. But if you can share examples at any scale of your project making an impact beyond your little bubble, that certainly helps and it really excites donors. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more beyond just numbers. Because numbers prove scale. They're still important. We still require some sort of measurable impact. But especially for our non-IEF staff audience, like our donors or our partners, stories make your results human and really connect with people who probably have never been to your field site before. So when you can combine both numbers and stories in the same report, that's usually the most persuasive strategy. And oftentimes when we're trying to find material to share with donors through our newsletter or on our website or anything, we look for examples that have both measurable impact and human interest stories, because they're usually the most compelling to our donors, partners, and people who are just interested in IEF, maybe have never supported elephant conservation before. So the project worked, with farmers and elephants interacting peacefully. This sounds great. It may be an offhand comment you make at a conference or in the hallway as someone asks about your project. But there's no real personality here, right? So instead, you can say something like, farmers in Mukim Panga planted thorny trees to deter elephants. When the herds avoided their fields, the farmers named the grove Peace Forest. And so it's these little tidbits of information that you may gloss over when you're in the field interacting with your communities that maybe you shouldn't take for granted, because these little tidbits of personality provide context to your work and really connect with donors. Weak stories, like the bad example in red, sound interchangeable with any project. You could use that statement to describe any of our human elephant conflict projects. They don't really set your project apart. So think of moments. Here's my challenge to you. Next time you're in the field interacting with communities or doing grueling elephant work that you've probably done dozens of times before, think of moments that capture some sort of community pride, or maybe describe a unique or interesting behavior you saw in elephants or other wildlife, or demonstrate some amount of transformation and see that moment through someone else's shoes, especially someone who's not familiar with your work at all, and try to think of what they would find compelling about your project and include those moments in your next report. Develop that into some small little story that can really go a long way. Another example, our rangers patrolled as usual and faced some challenges but continued their work. And certainly, rangers are often forgotten heroes in the conservation world, but this story, again, doesn't have much personality. It's hard to connect someone emotionally to the work here, especially if they've never interacted with rangers before or have been boots on the ground to see the challenges that rangers face. Instead, here's a good example that combines both the numbers that we've been talking about a lot here with a story. So, for example, mobile anti poaching teams completed 1,745 patrol days, preventing 18 poaching attempts. There's your clear action, describes the impact because of that action. Now let's bring in the human interest piece. Ranger Sunday Kaonga is now pursuing a wildlife management degree, building capacity for lasting management. Shows the human side of your work, which is, of course, really important in our field. That data with the numbers plus the story gives your work credibility and heart. The weak example in red doesn't quantify anything and it doesn't connect emotionally. Um, Again, think about the people who are reading a report beyond just IEF. Even for IEF staff, it's really important for us to connect to your project too. Again, in case you apply for further funding after your project period ends, or in case surprise funding appears on our doorstep, which sometimes it does, and we can remember your project because we've connected with it and we can understand the real impact. The donors remember stories long after they forget statistics. And the statistics, of course, are very important so we can quantify the impact, but it's the stories that stick with people. Think about what a donor might tell their friend about your work that would convince that friend to also want to support your work. Those stories are going to be short, specific, and pretty personable, especially if that donor has to relay your story to someone else. You don't want it to be this long, meandering story. You want to give personality pretty quickly. So here's Here's an attempt at a human interest story that we can probably improve. Farmers were happy with the project. They learned about elephants and are now living peacefully with them. The training was a big success and everyone was thankful to IEF for their support, which we appreciate hearing. But again, there's not too much personality here, and this story could describe many of our projects. It's not unique to yours. So instead, try mentioning specific people. Before the project, Farmer Sunil stayed awake most nights banging tins to chase elephants from his field. After joining our coexistence training, he planted chili along his fences and hasn't lost a single crop this season. Now he's teaching neighboring farmers to use the same methods. It's the first time I've slept through the night in years, he laughed. You can probably think of, if you interact with farmers through your work, you can probably think of dozens of Sunils at your site who have the same experience. This story is effective because it identifies a real person. And in our world, you probably want to make sure you get that person's permission to share their story in your report. It describes a specific change. Um, the quote that Sunil provided, it's the first time I've slept through the night in years, shows a transformation. That quote also feels very human and not scripted, which can be challenging, especially if you're translating a non-English language into English. You may have to obviously use different words than maybe that person would have used, but try to make sure your quote doesn't feel very robotic. And it obviously connects directly to the project objectives of reducing human elephant conflict. So the weak version in red on the left says farmers were happy with the project, but that's really too broad. The strong version tells us about Sunil, who used to stay up at night banging tins to chase away elephants. After training, he planted chili and citrus and hasn't lost a crop all season. We can actually picture him. We can hear his voice and feel the relief he has. That's memorable because we can all relate to that feeling of relief, even if you have never spent a night watching out for elephants raiding farmlands. Here's another one. A weak example. The Rangers worked very hard and did many patrols, even in difficult conditions. They are proud of their work and will continue protecting elephants. This praises the effort. It says the Rangers worked hard, but it doesn't really connect emotionally or personally with the reader. Instead, you can say something like, during one of the early morning patrols, Ranger Lydia spotted smoke rising from the hills, a sign of illegal charcoal burning. Within hours, her team located the site and removed two snares set nearby. Lydia said, when we find and stop this early, it saves elephants we'll never even see. Her pride reflects how IEF support has turned daily patrols into meaningful victories. So this strong story shows action. Lydia spotting the smoke, removing the snares, and saying, when we stop it early, it saves elephants we've never even seen. That one quote of just having this impact beyond the actual elephants that these rangers are seeing every day says everything, right? That's one of the hallmarks of a great conservation project, having impact beyond your little bubble. One more example, and then we'll move on a little bit. So I did this next example pair because in the previous two examples, the better version has been longer than the weaker version. And in this case, I want to show you that just because you have a long story doesn't mean it's a good story. So here's a weak example. We organized several student training sessions to build capacity in wildlife research. Many students participated and showed great enthusiasm for conservation. They learned about elephant behavior, data collection, and GPS mapping, and we believe these skills will be useful for their future careers. Some students mentioned that they enjoyed working in the field and were inspired to do more. Overall, the trainings were successful, and we plan to continue offering them next year. This is pretty generic and repetitive. Students learned, students were inspired. There's no identifiable person, place, or outcome, and it reads again like a list of activities, not a story of transformation or change. Instead, you can say something like, before joining our IEF supported field course, Nimesha, a 22-year-old biology student, had never used GPS. Within days, she was mapping elephant footprints and leading her peers in reporting data. I didn't realize I could do this kind of work, she said. Nimesha now volunteers weekly with the parks monitoring team, proof that one short training can launch a conservation career. This is a great example because it's one person, one moment, one transformation. It's sort of all self-contained, and you can envision talking to Nemesha or being in Nemesha's shoes. I think maybe a lot of projects are reluctant to share stories like this because it is so isolated. It comes off as an anecdote. But our donors read this anecdote as reflective of your project and really connect with these anecdotes, even though they may not speak directly to the huge quantifiable measurable outcomes you've presented elsewhere in your report. That's why we encourage all our grantees to have both the measurable impacts that show the huge breadth of the impact you're having and these personal anecdotes or personal interest stories that really connect with our audiences. This story also shows some sort of tangible skill like the GPS mapping with a lasting result that shows that this student is going to go on to have a long career in conservation. That quote, oftentimes you don't have quotes to share, and that's okay, but this quote adds authenticity and warmth to the story. Okay, the last section of the report before, or the workshop before we go into questions, we want to talk about formatting your report. Because ultimately, this is a document, a PDF file that you're sending to us, and we've got to read it, and our partners and donors have to read it. And the writing itself, of course, you've got to rely on. You've got to really lean into good writing in your report. But formatting your report is really important because it actually helps the words leap off the page and communicate your story. If they sort of are, the writing and the formatting sort of depend on each other. If you've got bad writing but good formatting, we can see through that pretty quickly. If you've got good writing but bad formatting, it's really hard to communicate your story if you can't literally absorb the information off the page. And so really you've got to have good writing and good formatting for truly effective reporting. Um, IEF, although we have guidelines about what we want included in your report, we're pretty flexible in formatting. So these 4 pages come from 4 different IEF reports. On the right-hand side, you've got a really glossy one that uses a lot of photographs. But on the left side of the page, you've got one that has no images on this page. And both of these we would consider, both of these examples come from reports we consider pretty effective. uh, you'll notice some commonalities between these that I'll go through now. So one tip is to keep consistent with the format of the guidelines, the reporting guidelines that are in your grant agreement. These sections are numbered in our guidelines, and it's pretty, at least for the IES staff, it's easy to review your reports when those numbers match the numbers in the guidelines. You also just, the most important part about your formatting, because people may have style preferences, is to be consistent with formatting that is readable. So in terms of font, using something pretty easy on the eyes, nothing wild. So use something like Calibri, Arial, or another sans serif font. Or if you want to use a serif font, use something like Times New Roman. 11 to 12, not too much bigger than that, and definitely not too much smaller. It often helps to have some space between your lines, so 1.15 to 1.5 line spacing. You'll notice on these examples, there's white space between a lot of the paragraphs, or at least bullet points. That helps to break down the information so the reader can absorb it chunk by chunk. Margins, just make sure you standard 1.5 inch margins without your text going all the way to the edges of the page. Shorter paragraphs are much better than longer paragraphs. If you find yourself writing a really long paragraph, see where you can break that into multiple smaller paragraphs that might be 3 to 5 lines long. If you've got a really long block of text, a long paragraph, that really discourages reading the whole thing. Headings are really helpful, so mark your headings in a bold or a larger font. Generally, it's good to keep everything left justified instead of center just aligned. And lists are great. We love lists. So use bullets or numbers to clarify your activities or your outcomes or things like that. So here's an example of a report IEF may receive that talks about the project activities. And I'm not going to read through this whole thing because we're talking about formatting here. But this is pretty uninviting to read. You receive this on your desk and you're like, oh, you just do this little sigh, like I've got to get through this and figure out what's going on. So notice there's no headings or structure here. The actual writing in here is pretty good if you actually read it, but this long, dense paragraph hides the outcomes. It reads like a diary, not a summary. And especially in this section, this is not the personal interest story. We want to understand exactly what went on or is going on with your work. And this photo too is sort of just in the middle of the paragraph somewhere, and it doesn't have a caption, so I'm not sure why this elephant is important to your story. Is this elephant even from your field site? Instead, you can transform the same exact text into something that looks like this and communicate your story much better. So this example is structured with subheadings in here. Those subheadings are bolded so you can see them very easily. Notice everything is left justified. The key things you want are highlighted because you have literally a section called key achievements and bulleted, and so it's really easy to go down those. And the evidence of the impact is there. And then our photograph too isn't just sort of in the middle of the paragraph interrupting the flow of text. And it's got a caption that connects that photo to the story you're telling in your report. So again, IEF is pretty flexible on formatting. We're not going to talk more about good and bad examples because it's ultimately a stylistic choice. And honestly, there are probably a few different styles that would be effective for any report. My biggest tip is just be consistent with the formatting and make sure your story jumps off the page and your formatting doesn't hide that message from getting across. So before we wrap it up and also open it up for questions, just as a reminder for IES specifically, there are a few other deliverables that are part of the report requirements for your grant. These aren't just extra filler information that we're requesting to make your lives more difficult. These help tell your stories. The reason we ask for them is that donors seek them out. And so if we have that material ready for them, they're primed and can better understand the impact of your work. Oftentimes, a good photo or a video can help showcase your project in a way that a 10-page report just can't. The report obviously is still important, but these photos go a long way. So photo files, for IEF, it's okay if they're embedded in text, especially with a caption, but we also request just separate images of those so that we can use them flexibly. A video update with each report and the exact requirements for that video, including your voice and images of elephants in the video. Those are all described in particular. We're not looking for anything Spielberg level or 10 or 20 minutes long. Just a few minute update really helps connect with donors across the world who may never be able to visit you in person. If you've got any other materials that have resulted from your work, whether that's booklets or learning materials you give at workshops, we'd like copies of those. And of course, if you publish anything about your work, IEF would like copies of those. We have donors who are very interested in even the scholarly level work that results from your projects, so those can be really helpful. So thank you for hanging in here with me, especially as I've got a cold and I've been coughing and congested. But I just wanted to take a moment to really emphasize the key takeaways. So focus on the outcome of your work, not just the activities. You've got to always show what changed. Be clear, concise, and honest. Um, we've supported enough projects that we can sort of see through and read between the lines when things may not be going well, despite you saying otherwise. Don't look at those challenges as a negative because our donors also understand the realities of field work and that transparency actually helps build trust and it actually helps you to be honest rather than trying to shove everything under the rug. Make sure your report is easy to read with formatting that is structured and visually appealing. Make sure your report has a story, at least one story that inspires people to connect. Remember, people connect with people. As much as we all love elephants, it's ultimately the human aspect that's going to drive a lot of your work and drive conservation outcomes for elephants. And our donors connect with the people that are leading the work on the ground. As much as they love elephants too, our most successful projects are the ones that have taken the time to consider how they may connect with these lay audiences. Think of us at IEF as your partner. That's how we consider all of our projects. We're not just some facade that just disperses money and requires paperwork to give you that money. We're really in it to ensure you're successful in achieving these positive outcomes for elephant conservation. And this quote may sort of embody the importance of this workshop is that your work makes the story. Nothing can replace the work you're doing on the ground, but that report makes sure it can be heard. So, clear, measurable, and honest reporting leads to trust, and trust leads to continued support. Every data point, every photo, every personal story you share helps IEF grow global funding for elephant conservation, and we are very appreciative for the time and consideration you put into your reporting. Together, we're not just writing reports, we're documenting that progress that we're making together towards a sustainable future for elephants. And so we want to thank you for being part of that story. And so at this point, I'll toss it over to Sarah to maybe moderate questions and we can both go through any questions you have.
Thank you, Chase. So let's cover some basics first in the chat. People are asking how many reports are expected for projects. And in general, for a normal grant process, IEF allows for a 1-year grant. And so that would require an interim report roughly around the 6-month mark, but we're a little flexible, and then a final report. But this changes if it's a 2-year or a 3-year project. If you've never been funded from IEF, chances are our board is not going to green light a 3-year project right out of the gate. So you should probably consider scheduling or structuring your project for a 1-year timeline, and then that would be 2 reports. But like Chase mentioned, we know things don't always go right. So if you do need a no cost extension, things like that, you'll still file all those project reports, but we can give you extra time. So for example, you have a 1-year report, you've submitted your midterm report, and then you decide, things aren't working out. We can't finish our activities, our objectives in the length of time. You would then file a second 6-month report. And then after that extension's over, a final report, depending on how long your extension is. But essentially, we want to check in with you every 6 months at the very least. We're very flexible, and we're also very understanding, but we want to know what's going on. You're the ones there, you're our eyes and ears, and that's why we kind of structure it that way. Other questions we had in the chat, people were asking about the current grant cycle, when outcomes for any proposals would be. Obviously, we are still in the final stages of making those selections. So decisions for those grant reports will be announced in either late December or early January, depending on how much debate there is. And like Chase said, we were recording this, and we will provide the video and the slides, PDF of the slides, for you guys later on today, or at the very earliest tomorrow, depending on how the day goes. But other than that, I think that those are all the questions we had. If you have any more questions, please put them in the chat. We are so happy to help facilitate and do whatever we can to make this as easy as possible, and to make a symbiotic relationship working with grantees. And
Yes.
go ahead, Chase.
I was going to say, while you get your final questions into the chat, we also wanted to share the announcement again of our upcoming Conservation and Research Symposium. So the 21st International Elephant Conservation Research Symposium, which is the premier opportunity to network and share your work related to elephant conservation and research, is happening 1 month from today. So we're 1 month out. And that's why Sarah referenced, depending on how today goes, because we're busy planning for all the last minute things that go along with the symposium. So our symposium is happening December 5th to 8th in Fort Worth, Texas, in the US. It's the first time it's been in the US in 10 years. If you want more information about that, you can go to our website at elephantconservation.org. The registration link is there. Any updates will be posted there, but you can also follow us all along on social media for any updates as well. The provisional program, including all the talks that will have been accepted and we plan to share at the symposium, will be published on our website later today.
That's true, and we are very excited about the symposium. One more thing about reporting. We generally want 2 reports per year. So one sort of halfway, one at the end of the year. Again, there's a little flexibility, but no matter how long your project is, whether it's a 3-year project, a 2-year project, a 5-year project, we want 2 reports per year. And yes, you will get this presentation in your email. Everyone who registered for this event will get your copies of everything, again, either later today or tomorrow. So we're very excited to share all of this, and you're welcome to share it with your colleagues. We're not gatekeeping. Any more questions?
There were a few more questions. One in particular was, Sarah, maybe you have a perspective on this too. Lynn asked, if there's a way that you can balance transparency about the project challenges with a tone that encourages continued support.
From an IEF perspective, the most important thing is to be honest. So even if it's bad news, you should tell us, because then we will be able to help troubleshoot and work with you to hopefully make things successful. And we're very good stewards of information. So if you are sharing sensitive information, scary or problematic information that necessarily wouldn't be good to share with a donor, we're not going to share that with a donor, but you should share it with us. So, like Chase said, there are ways to talk about challenges that make it encouraging, but at the end of the day, be as honest as possible. And we want to play with the most accurate and the most information that we can do, because we can help shape that.
Yeah, I have nothing to add because I think that response is encompasses the whole thought process behind it. One more applicable question to reporting from Long Tong. Can a report be rejected? What are the possible grounds by which a report may be rejected?
Great question. Usually, if we find a report insufficient in some way, we are going to ask you for more. We're going to have follow-up questions. We're going to be like, you mentioned this. Can you please tell us more about that? Or a lot of reports fall flat by not providing the extra deliverables. You will talk about a booklet that you produced and distributed, but you didn't include the digital copy of the booklet, or there's no video included, or there's no photos included. So we will go back and forth with you trying to tease out more information so that we can get what we need. And ultimately, it's in everyone's best interest to provide the best report possible and the best materials possible, because we're not going to authorize the next installment of funds to come out to you and to be distributed until that midterm report is acceptable.
Yeah, I think that's good. Also related to the last question about sensitive information that you were talking about, Sarah, if there is sensitive information you want to share, maybe that's why you didn't include it in your report, and we may ask for more information. You're welcome to explicitly say this is sensitive information, and whenever we share your report with people, we will make sure that that sensitive information is removed. Because we understand that a lot of you are working in areas or on topics that are sensitive, and we don't want to compromise that.
Absolutely. And you can both tell that to us when you submit the report, but you can also flag it within the report. You can have it as a separate section and mark it as sensitive, where we are very aware of these types of things. And again, we are try to be best stewards of the information that you give us.
Great. There are some other questions in the chat that sort of fall into the category of the symposium. So if you have any questions about the symposium, feel free to email us, especially if you have concerns about attending. Other questions about this workshop series in general. So this is our third workshop this year. So we had one about grant applications. So if you're considering applying for a grant application next year through IEF, highly encourage you watch that. We have this one that will also be posted to the website alongside that presentation. And then we also had a workshop by Lucy King from Save the Elephants on beehive fencing because we know that's a topic a lot of people are interested in. There seems to be interest in more workshops, and while we can't do it something like twice a month or anything like that, we certainly want to provide resources when they would be useful to our community. So if you've got ideas for any workshops, feel free to put them in the chat or email us separately, and that's something we're considering. We hope this content is evergreen, so you can refer to this presentation later. If there are updates, we can provide updated workshops, but the idea is that you'll be able to refer to these and we'll just have this growing library of workshop topics. We've got a few in the hopper that may be in development, but if you've got a specific topic that you want covered, please let us know. Okay, I think that's it from the questions. Again, you can always email us in case you have questions I'm putting my IEF email in the chat for anything related to these workshops. Keep an eye on your inbox. Within 24 hours, we hope to send you both the PDF version of the slides along with the recording that you're free to distribute to anyone you think may be interested. But thank you again for joining us this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. We really appreciate your attention and the work you're doing for elephants. So have a good day, everyone.